Hi, my name is Jonathan Kim, and my presentation is on existentialism challenged and conveyed to the literary form. So for my project, I essentially had two parts to it. The first part was a paper about existentialism and its connections to Kurt Vonnegut's novels. The second part was actually the part that I enjoyed the most, which is where I got to do some of my own writing and incorporate existential themes into the writing. So first we'll have to ask ourselves, what is existentialism? Now, existentialism is a word that's tossed around kind of easily in today's society. People will talk about existential teen angst or something like that just to signify anybody who questions what is the meaning of life. However, there's really a lot more than just asking about what life is about to existentialism, and I'll get around to that. So, I mean, there's a number of different existential philosophers, and the variety in their philosophies and the slight variations is actually what kind of creates the ambiguity about what existentialism really is. So, for example, you have the precursors to the movement, such as Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. You have a really literary author, Camus, and then you have some of the more core fundamental philosophers, such as Jaspers, Heidegger, and Sartre. And I really focused on Sartre's work because he's really seen as a key and principal existentialist, and he's actually the man who invented the term existentialism. So I really focused on his ideas. So let's get back to this idea of what is existentialism. Well, to understand what existentialism is, you have to understand the differences between existence and essence, and we'll start from there. So existence, Sartre says that all things can be defined by their existence and their essence. Essence can be really seen as the purpose or meaning of something, and existence is like the physical form of it. So for example, think about this mic. The essence of this mic would be to increase the volume of my voice, but the existence of it is a physical, actual thing. Now for a mic, or anything that's really created by a human, the essence is there first. The people have to think about what the mic is going to do before they actually create it. Now, but for humans, Sartre says, existence precedes essence. Why is this? Well, one of the reasons he gives is because God doesn't exist. This is really an idea that came up throughout the 20th century, where people started thinking that maybe God doesn't exist. And so from following this idea, Sartre decides, okay, now we don't know what our essence primarily is. Now, even if God were to exist, it would still be in the responsibility of humans to determine their essence, because it's impossible for humans to objectively know what God's purpose for humans is. So that's why existence precedes essence in the case of humans. Now, that doesn't mean that we have no essence. It falls upon our own responsibility to create our own essence, to create our own meaning and purpose in life. Now, Sartre says that there's going to be some anguish at the responsibility of having to choose our own essence. There's going to be despair at the fact that there's no predestined essence that we have, and in fact, we're going to have to choose our own essence through our actions, and that gives us a responsibility. So now that we know what existentialism is, how does it connect to literature? So I looked at 4 Kurt Vonnegut's novels, Breakfast of Champions, Slaughterhouse-Five, Cat's Cradle, and Mother Night, to really see how existential philosophy was presented in these novels. And I really came to realize that existential philosophy is a core part of the debate going on with these novels. It's a core part of the argument. These novels actually address different aspects of existentialism. I'm not necessarily going to go into each of the specifics right now because we're on a shorter time frame, but understand that the novels don't just portray existentialism, they also challenge some of the ideas behind it. So what did I do? I actually wrote a novel that was in 3 different parts, and I kind of based it off of Camus' quote, who says that he who despairs of the human condition is a coward, but he who has hope for it is a fool. So I started with the fool who has hope for the human condition, and then I went back, and then it goes into somebody who understands the existential condition, and then somebody who despairs of the existential condition. And how did I do it? I had 3 different parts. The first part was essentially this kind of hero character. I'm kind of, so it was this hero character over here, kind of portrayed by this Naruto-esque character here, who kind of rushes in, and he has high hopes, he has all this ambition, and he knows his purpose. However, I kind of satirize this character in my novel because I have somebody who overthrows a dictator, but eventually is overthrown himself because he's a bad ruler. The second part was about a writer who's full of existential angst, who doesn't understand what his purpose is, but is living life and goes through life, and eventually he dies, and his life is kind of meaningless. So what do we see in his life? And then the third part was about this depressed woman who wants to kill herself, but eventually doesn't. And another quote of Camus is, he said that every day I have to ask myself, should I kill myself or should I have a cup of coffee? So there's no real answer to why we don't necessarily kill ourselves in the face of existential despair. It's just we decide to go on living. So for what I want to do for you actually is I'm going to read a part of my story for you, the part about the depressed woman. So this is how I'm going to end off. Arya woke up. Her head was pounding. God, what was she still doing alive? Slowly, gradually, ignoring the heavy beating in her head, Arya got a sense of her surroundings. She lifted her head off the table where a small puddle of bile had formed. There was, however, no sign of having thrown up the pills. Arya got up, turned on the light hanging in the middle of the kitchen, and looked around. The floor was dusty but dry, there was nothing but trash in the bin, and Arya couldn't smell the typical acidity of vomit. So had she just consumed the pills and survived? It seemed like it. Good God, she was alive. Arya had to take in another couple moments to reprocess the information. Today was Tuesday. No, she wouldn't need to go into work today, but she had notified Al 2 weeks ago that she wasn't going to be in today. First things first, Arya got herself a glass of water from the tap and a napkin to wipe away the spittle on the table, and then sat back down. The cold rush of water pouring down her throat did nothing to alleviate her headache, but it did soothe the tension in her stomach, which Arya hadn't even realized was compounding the pain in her skull. Arya took another sip of water and then just sat for a few minutes cringing, willing the pain away. Eventually the severity of the pounding lessened. Now she could think. What would she do today? She wished she was at the news station right now, but it was too late. Work served as that slight distraction from the gaping emptiness that shadowed her. Oh God, her stomach. Arya sprinted over to the sink, huddled over it, and heaved. Nothing came out but more spit. She could taste the bitterness in the back of her throat, but nothing was coming. A breather panting over the sink, and then she dragged herself back to the table. Why in the hell wasn't she dead? She wanted very badly to die, but didn't have the energy to try again. She flirted with the idea, but it seemed like the pills weren't going to work, and trying to find a gun would be just so difficult. Besides, it felt rude to try to kill herself on the day after she had failed. Some small part of her believed that she would one day be one of those women who told stories about how they had been miraculously saved from the hand of death and were now leading happy and healthy lives. Of course, her daily self despised them, but one cannot help but be aware of a potential message from God. No, she could find a pistol another day, and that would be sure to finish the deed. So that's part of my novel. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and thank you for coming. That's it.